Before tanks, before bombs, came men who carried empires on their backs. Their sandals pressed into the dirt, their shields glistened beneath the sun, and their discipline made them into a machine of flesh and iron. And in their shadow, one name rose like fire against the iron of Rome, a name whispered with fear in the Senate and shouted with hope in the fields: Spartacus. Plutarch wrote that he was no ordinary slave, intelligent, charismatic, a man who could inspire with words as easily as with steel. But Rome had condemned him to the sands of the arena, where life was measured in blood spilled for the amusement of crowds. Gladiators were not men. They were entertainment, trained to kill or to die before roaring spectators. For years, Spartacus endured this fate. Yet somewhere inside, his spirit refused to break. Rome expected obedience. Instead, it awakened a storm.
The stench of sweat and iron, the rattling of chains as men are herded back into their cells after another brutal show. 70 gladiators sat in silence that night, their bodies bruised, their backs striped by the whip. But their eyes were burning with an idea. No swords, no shields, no horses, only what they could seize from kitchens and storerooms: knives, spits from the fire, crude clubs. Yet desperation sharpens courage, and courage can topple empires. One night, when the guards grew careless, Spartacus gave the signal. The cell doors burst open, chains were torn free, and with a cry that echoed through the halls, they struck. The guards never stood a chance. Blood splattered the stone corridors. Shouts of alarm turned to gurgles of death. By dawn, the school was in flames. 70 men, once slaves, now fugitives, and history had changed forever. What began as desperation soon became defiance. From Capua, word spread like wildfire. Peasants fled their fields, shepherds abandoned their flocks, deserters left their Roman banners, criminals broke their bonds. All rushed to join the fugitives. Within weeks, 70 gladiators had become hundreds.
Then thousands. Picture them on the slopes of Mount Vesuvius, smoke curling into the sky, the clang of iron echoing as crude weapons were hammered into shape, men sparring under torchlight, the weak becoming strong, the frightened becoming soldiers, and Spartacus at the center, reminding them their war was not for gold, not for conquest, but for freedom. He outlawed luxury. Gold and silver were forbidden. Only iron mattered. Iron for swords, iron for shields, iron for survival. What he built was more than an army. It was a society at war. Rome was stunned. The Senate could hardly believe that slaves were defying the legions. So they sent Praetor Claudius Glabro with 3,000 men to crush the rebellion. Confident, he marched to Vesuvius, sealing the mountain paths, waiting for the fugitives to starve. But Spartacus was no cornered animal. By night, his men clambered down the cliffs, ropes made from vines, silent as ghosts. They fell upon the Romans from behind, shrieks, steel, chaos. The praetor's army was annihilated. 70 slaves had just destroyed Rome's first army. From then on, Spartacus was no mere fugitive, he was a general. Battle after battle, he defeated Rome's forces. Captured weapons filled his armories. Captured soldiers filled his ranks. What began as a mob was now an army.
an army of peasants, shepherds, deserters, and outlaws. An army that carried with it a single promise: die free or die fighting. With every victory, the impossible seemed closer, and Rome trembled. But rebellion is not a straight road. Spartacus's followers were many, but not united.
Some sought only to escape Italy. Others dreamed of vengeance. Still others wanted loot and plunder. Two rival leaders broke away, taking 30,000 men. Rome pounced, crushing them near Mount Gargano. Their corpses littered the fields, a warning of what awaited the rest. Yet Spartacus pressed on. At his height, he commanded over 100,000 men, a force so vast it was said their columns stretched for miles, like a moving city of fire and iron. Now imagine this sight: a column of slaves marching across Italy, their children riding on carts, their wives carrying baskets of grain, blacksmiths hammering on anvils even as they walked. 8 kilometers, 10 kilometers, 12 kilometers long, a city on the move. It was more than an army, it was a nation in exile. Rome responded with fury. Consuls were sent, legions marched, but Spartacus struck with cunning. He ambushed them in valleys, attacked their flanks, cut their supply lines. Time and again, Rome's pride was shattered, and with each defeat, the Senate grew more desperate. But even storms can fracture. Internal divisions tore at the rebellion. Some longed to cross the Alps to scatter back to their homelands. Others wanted to march on Rome itself. Spartacus, ever pragmatic, chose to stay in the south, fortifying camps, stockpiling weapons, preparing for a war of endurance. For a time, it worked, but cracks widened. Ambition pulled leaders apart, and Rome, bleeding but unbroken, adapted. The Senate turned to Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome, cold, ruthless, patient. Crassus rebuilt discipline with iron and blood. He revived decimation, the execution of every 10th man in units that fled. Terror forged his army into steel. When he marched against Spartacus, it was not with arrogance, but calculation. Trenches were dug, camps fortified, supply lines guarded. Slowly, the net tightened. The final clash came in 71 BCE.
Spartacus, seeing the end, gathered his men. He is said to have slain his own horse before them, declaring, "If I win, I will have many more horses. If I lose, I will need none." With that, he charged, straight at the Roman commander himself. The field became a storm of blood and steel. Spartacus cut through lines, his sword flashing, his men roaring. But numbers and discipline told. The rebel army shattered. Tens of thousands were slain. 6,000 survivors were crucified along the Appian Way, a road lined with agony for miles, a warning to all who might dream of freedom. Spartacus's body was never found. Some say he fell in the thick of battle. Others believe he vanished, becoming more legend than man. And yet, his defiance never truly died. To Rome, he was a traitor, a criminal, a ghost who haunted their pride. To the slaves and the oppressed, he became a symbol, proof that even the mightiest empire could tremble before the will of the broken.
It was psychological. A rear attack away at the tail of the column were caught right there, and often executed on the spot, especially during critical campaigns. Discipline didn't end when a soldier left formation. It followed him that forever changed how the Roman rearguard operated. From that point on, rearguards became brush, climbing hills and appearing where no one expected them. They were the guardians of the flanks, the watchmen of the column sides. If the eyes of the legion were up front and the rear guard was the shield at its back, then the flanks, they protected its strategic integrity. Accounts from Caesar's campaigns in Gaul show how experienced flankers prevented ambushes and tactical autonomy. Because at the edges of the legion, there was no immediate command, no shouted orders, no trumpet sounding. There was only silence, trees, and the constant possibility of stumbling the two lateral gates, sinistra and dextra. Guards were immediately stationed at these points, even before the wall was finished. Inside the marked perimeter, the legion divided itself by quadrant. Tents were pitched according to a strict hierarchy. Officers in the center is what allowed Rome to advance without relying on cities, fortresses, or allied shelters. The legion carried everything it needed, even its own city. But when the final stake was driven, the last tent pitched, and the final watch assigned, a silence fell over the camp. And that's when the most tense part of the day began, the night. Unlike other ancient armies that saw nightfall as a time for rest or even revelry, Rome treated it as the beginning of a new operational phase. Because at night, the legion didn't sleep. It watched. Each contubernarium received its ration: raw grains, salt, vinegar, and portions of dried meat, if available. Soldiers gathered around small, discreet fires, keeping their flames low to avoid giving away the camp's location. They prepared their food. No banquets, just function. They ground wheat with portable mills and cooked a thick porridge called pulse. Sometimes they mixed vinegar and salt with water to create pasca, the sour drink typical of Roman soldiers. In parallel, medics treated the wounded, cleaning cuts, setting splints, and applying ointments made from honey and vinegar. It was also the time to care for the animals. Mules were brushed, fed, and watered. Any damage to carts, harnesses, or gear was fixed immediately because nothing could delay the next day's march. That night, the next day's orders were read aloud. Centurions received instructions directly from the tribunes who had just come from the praetorium. Punishments were announced, warnings delivered, and when necessary, executions carried out, calmly as a clear reminder that discipline never slept. But what truly defined a Roman night was its silence. The legion operated under a strict sound discipline code. No laughing, no music, no loud conversations. Even footsteps were muffled. The reason was simple. The enemy might be listening, and order had to prevail, even in the dark. Night patrols were strict. Each sentry was given the day's password, called the tessera, and had to present it at checkpoints during their shifts. Shifts rotated every 3 hours and were staggered to prevent exhaustion. The penalty for falling asleep on watch was the harshest of all: death by stoning, carried out by the sentinel's own contubernarium. A brutal practice, but one that ensured no one forgot what was at stake. Even at rest, every soldier kept his shield within reach, his gladius at his side, his sandals ready to slip on in seconds. In case of attack, everyone knew exactly where to run, what gate to defend, what formation to take. The legion was never caught off guard. It was the one doing the surprising. And so, after 24 hours, what seemed like just a military march revealed itself to be a flawless choreography of survival, strategy, and total domination of time and space. The Roman legion wasn't just made of soldiers. It was made of planning, discipline, and a doctrine that could transform any hostile terrain into an extension of the empire. At once machine, beast, and city, it marched like a mechanism, breathed like a living body, and rose like a portable fortress every single day. And now that you've walked beside it for a day, ask yourself, could you survive this routine for even a week?
Along the Via Appia, The road that connected Capua with Rome, a spectacle of terror and punishment, or the Senate. Crassus, although effective, was left with a reputation for being ruthless. If you like this content, leave your like and subscribe.